I was 15 when my father helped me build the treehouse. It wasn't anything fancy at first, just a few old planks nailed into the thick branches of an oak that had been standing behind our house long before any of us were born. That tree was ancient, the kind of thing that seemed too big, too alive to belong in a backyard. Even in daylight, the bark looked darker than it should have been, almost black, with veins that twisted upward like they were hiding something underneath. We built the treehouse one summer when school was out. The sun was brutal that year, but the shade beneath that oak was always cool, almost too cool sometimes. I remember hammering the last nail into one of the support beams and thinking the air felt wrong, heavy like a storm was coming. But the sky was perfectly clear. At first, it was everything I wanted. My little escape. I brought books up there, a flashlight, sometimes even my lunch. From up high, I could see the entire backfield and the woods beyond. My parents didn't like me going too far into those trees. They said people got lost back there sometimes. But from the treehouse I could stare as long as I wanted. The forest looked endless, like it swallowed the world whole. The first strange thing happened a week later. I was up there just before sunset, sketching the view, when I heard something move below. It wasn't the usual rustling of animals. This was heavier. Slow. I leaned over the edge and called out, thinking maybe my dad was checking on me. But no one answered. The sound stopped. Then, right after, I heard a whisper. It came from beneath the treehouse, soft but clear. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone, a low, almost curious hum, like someone trying to remember a song. When I climbed down, there was no one there. The ground was undisturbed. Not even footprints. That night, I told my parents about it. They laughed it off, said maybe it was the wind or some kid from the neighborhood trying to spook me. But the nearest house was nearly half a mile away, and nobody came out this far without a reason. I told myself they were right, but the next day, I noticed something new carved into the wood near the base of the tree. It wasn't there before. It looked like a symbol, 3 crooked lines crossing over each other like a jagged star. I tried to wash it off, but the lines were deep, burned into the bark somehow. I didn't tell anyone that time. For a while, things were quiet again. I started using the treehouse more, pretending nothing weird had happened. Sometimes I'd spend entire afternoons up there listening to music or doing homework. The air felt calm, normal. Until one evening in late July. The sun had already set, but I stayed longer than I should have, watching the fireflies blink across the field. My flashlight batteries died, and I remember sitting in the darkness, enjoying how peaceful it felt, until that quiet changed. It started with the wind. Or at least it sounded like wind at first. But the branches around me weren't moving. The leaves didn't rustle. The sound was below me again, circling the tree slowly. It was low, rhythmic, like breathing. I froze. My fingers dug into the wooden floorboards. I tried not to move, tried to convince myself it was just an animal. But then I heard it again, that whispering voice. Closer this time. Right underneath me. I couldn't understand what it was saying, but it wasn't random. It was speaking, slow, deliberate, almost like it was repeating something over and over. I crawled toward the ladder, heart pounding, and started to climb down, trying to stay quiet. Halfway down I stopped. Something moved in the shadows below. Just a faint shimmer of motion, too dark to make out, but I knew it wasn't human. Whatever it was, it stood there, barely visible, facing the tree. I don't know how I could tell, but I felt it watching me. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Then it spoke again, clear this time. A voice, faint but sharp, like someone whispering directly into my ear. Go back up. I fell off the ladder. When I hit the ground, I scrambled backward, eyes darting everywhere. There was nothing there. The field was empty. The woods were still. But I could still feel it. That presence. That weight in the air pressing down on me. I ran all the way to the house and didn't stop until I slammed the door behind me. My parents came rushing out, asking what happened, but I couldn't explain. I just said there was something by the tree. Something that told me to go back up. My dad grabbed a flashlight and went out to check. I begged him not to, but he just smiled like I was being dramatic. He was gone maybe 10 minutes before he came back, pale, quiet. He didn't say much, only that there wasn't anyone out there. But he wouldn't look me in the eyes when he said it. The next morning, the treehouse door was open. I always latched it shut from the inside, but somehow it was swinging back and forth in the wind. Inside, everything looked normal except for one thing. On the far wall, scratched deep into the wood, were those same 3 crooked lines. Only this time they were bigger. After that, I stopped going up there. For weeks, I avoided even looking at the tree. My parents didn't press me about it, and my dad quietly told my mom maybe we should take the treehouse down. But she said to leave it, she didn't want to upset me more. Then one night, I woke to a noise at my window. At first, I thought it was just rain or a branch scraping the glass. But when I looked, I saw something move outside, something standing in the yard between me and the tree. It was tall. So, the outline of a person, but wrong somehow, too thin, too stretched. It didn't move for almost a full minute. Just stood there. Then its head tilted slightly upward toward my window. I backed away and hid under the covers like a terrified kid. When I finally looked again, it was gone. The next morning, there were footprints in the dirt beneath my window, bare, human-looking but with too many toes. I stopped sleeping after that. Over the next few nights, the noises returned. Tapping, whispering, sometimes faint laughter. Always coming from the direction of the treehouse. I tried to tell myself it was animals or my imagination, but one night I heard something different, a creaking sound. Like footsteps. Inside the treehouse. I looked out my window and saw the faint glow of light coming from the small window of the treehouse. But there was no light up there. No electricity. Nothing that could glow like that. I don't know why I did it, but I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. Every step felt heavier than the last. The closer I got, the colder the air became, until I could see my breath even though it was the middle of summer. When I reached the ladder, the light inside vanished. Everything went silent. I stood there for what felt like forever, my hand on the first rung, trying to decide whether to climb. And then, something breathed just above me. I froze. Slowly, I tilted my flashlight upward. Through the gaps in the wooden floor, two pale hands hung down. Not human. Too long. The fingers curved unnaturally, and when the light hit them, they twitched, like they'd been waiting for me. I stumbled back, tripped, and the flashlight rolled away, beam flickering. I didn't wait. I ran as fast as I could to the house, slammed the door, locked it, and didn't look back. When my dad went out there in the morning, the treehouse was empty again. No light. No hands. But something had changed. The walls inside were covered now, from floor to ceiling, with those same crooked markings. Dozens of them. Hundreds. We tore it down that week. The wood didn't burn easily. It took hours, and even then the smoke smelled strange, sweet and metallic. When it was over, my dad buried the ashes and said not to talk about it again. For a long time we didn't. Until a few months later, when a new family bought the property next to ours. They had a little girl, maybe 7 or 8. One afternoon, I saw her playing near the edge of the woods. I waved and she smiled, but then she pointed toward the trees and asked if I'd built the house in the air. I told her there wasn't one anymore. She frowned and said, "Yes, there is. It's shining at night." That night, I looked out my window again. The field was empty. The sky was quiet. But just beyond the treeline, faint and flickering through the branches, I saw it. A small, cold light hanging in the dark. And somewhere underneath it, something whispering my name. For days after that night, I told myself I'd imagined the light. I wanted to believe that my eyes had just been tired, that it was a trick of the moon slipping through the branches. But deep down, I knew better. I knew what I'd seen. The memory of that whisper haunted me more than the sight of the light itself. It wasn't loud. It didn't even sound threatening. But the way it said my name, it wasn't like hearing someone call you from across the yard. It was inside my head, low and deliberate, as if whoever it was had been saying it for a long time, waiting for me to listen. I tried ignoring it. I kept my curtains shut. I stopped going near the back windows at night. For a while that helped. Weeks passed without anything strange happening, and I almost started to feel normal again. School started back up, and my parents were relieved that I was spending time anywhere but staring out at the woods. But sometimes, late at night, I'd still feel that familiar chill, the one that used to settle around the treehouse. It came without warning. The air would grow heavy, my room colder. I'd wake up in the dark and know, without even looking, that something outside was watching again. One night in early September, the feeling came back stronger than ever. I woke up drenched in sweat even though the room was freezing. The house was silent. No wind, no crickets, nothing. Just stillness. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, but the quiet pressed against my ears. Then I heard it. A single creak. Wood bending. I sat up. The sound came again, faint but steady, rhythmic. The kind of sound you hear when someone is walking across old floorboards. Only the treehouse didn't exist anymore. We'd burned it down, buried the ashes. I got up and went to the window. For a moment, I thought I'd see that faint glow again, hovering between the trees. But what I saw instead froze me completely. A shadow. Tall, thin, and motionless. It wasn't in the field this time, it was closer. Right on the edge of our yard, just beyond the light of the porch lamp. I couldn't see its face, but its head tilted the same way as before, slightly off, like it was studying me. I didn't move. Neither did it. The two of us just stood there, separated by glass and distance, and in that silence I felt the same impossible thing again, the whisper. Only this time it didn't say my name. It said, "Why did you burn it?" My throat went dry. I stumbled back from the window, knocking over a chair. My parents came rushing in seconds later, flipping on the lights. When I told them what I'd seen, they searched the yard again. Nothing. No footprints, no shadow, no sign that anyone had been there. My dad said maybe it was a dream, but I saw the look in his eyes. He didn't believe his own words. The next morning we found something at the edge of the yard, half buried in the dirt. A small piece of wood, charred and cracked like it had been burned years ago. On one side, carved deep into the blackened surface, were the same 3 crooked lines. That was the first time I saw my dad look afraid. He didn't say anything for a long time, then finally told me to get in the truck. We drove out of town for nearly an hour to a hardware store, where he bought a large chain and a lock. When we got back, he locked the back gate that led to the woods and told me not to go near it again. For a while it worked. The whispering stopped, the strange chills faded, and life started to resemble normal again. But something about that burned piece of wood stayed with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it, how it ended up back in our yard, how it hadn't completely turned to ash. So one afternoon when my parents were both at work, I decided to go looking. The lock on the gate wasn't hard to undo. I told myself I'd only go a little way into the trees, just enough to see if anything was out there. The air grew cooler the deeper I went, the light dimmer even though it was midday. After about 10 minutes of walking, I started to notice the smell. Faint at first, like burnt wood mixed with wet earth. It grew stronger the farther I went. And then I saw it. A clearing. Small, circular, covered in ash. Right in the center was a patch of ground that looked freshly disturbed, like something had been dug up. I almost turned back then, but a glint of light caught my eye. Something small and metallic half buried in the dirt. I crouched down and brushed the soil away. It was a nail, rusted, blackened at the edges. The same kind we'd used to build the treehouse. I remember the moment clearly. The instant I touched that nail, the air shifted. The woods went silent again. Not just quiet, empty. The kind of silence that makes your chest tighten. Then came the whisper. But this time it wasn't far away. It was right beside my ear. "You shouldn't have come back." I dropped the nail and ran. I didn't look behind me, didn't care which way I was going, only that I needed to get out. The woods seemed to twist around me, paths that should have been familiar suddenly bending in ways that didn't make sense. I could hear footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, following but never rushing. When I finally burst out of the trees and saw the house again, I fell to my knees, gasping for air. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint tapping on my window, though when I looked there was nothing there. The next morning, I found another symbol carved into the side of our house, deeper than the others, like it had been burned into the wall. That was when I realized something terrifying. We hadn't destroyed the treehouse. It had just moved. After that morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the last thing I'd said to myself before running out of the woods, that the treehouse hadn't been destroyed, it had moved. It sounded insane even in my own head, but the feeling was too strong to ignore. Every time I walked past the back window, I half expected to see it again, standing silently among the trees like nothing had ever happened. The symbol burned into the side of the house was impossible to explain away. My dad saw it first. He didn't say a word, just stared at it for a long time before scraping his hand down the back of his neck. My mom wanted to call the police, but what would we even say? That something invisible had carved a mark into our wall in the middle of the night? Dad repainted the siding that same day, 2 coats thick, but I noticed how often he looked toward the woods afterward. He'd stand on the porch with his coffee, pretending to check the weather, but his eyes always went to that same patch of trees, like he was waiting for something to move. I tried to push it all out of my mind, but the silence in the house made that impossible. The nights grew longer, the air colder. I'd wake up around the same time every night, 2:47 a.m. without fail. At first I thought it was just the stress, but soon I realized that was always when the quiet came. Not the peaceful kind, but that suffocating stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath. Then I started hearing the creaks again. They were faint at first, scattered, like the old house settling. But each night they grew louder, clearer, and always from the same place, the direction of the yard. I told myself it was animals, branches shifting in the wind. Except there was never any wind. One morning, after another sleepless night, I decided to ask around about the land. I didn't tell my parents, they were already on edge. Instead, I biked into town to see Mr. Harlan, the oldest man around and the only person who'd lived here longer than my parents. He used to sit on the bench outside the grocery store every day watching people go by like time didn't touch him. When I told him where we lived, his eyes changed. He didn't ask questions, didn't laugh it off. He just stared at me for a long moment before saying, "That oak's still there?" I nodded. He shook his head slowly. "Should have cut it down years ago. That tree don't forget." I asked him what he meant, but he wouldn't say. Instead, he leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Back before your folks bought that place, there was another family. Couple with a little boy. He built himself a house up in that tree, same as you. Didn't last long though. Kid went missing one night. They never found him. Just his drawings, nailed up inside that treehouse." I felt my stomach tighten. "What kind of drawings?" He frowned. "Same thing you've been seeing, I reckon. 3 lines crossed wrong. Some folks say it's older than this town, something carved into the trees by people who came through here before any of us." He paused, then added quietly, "Some say it marks a promise. Others say it marks a debt." I asked him what kind of debt, but he just looked away. "You shouldn't have gone back there," he said finally. "Once it knows your name, it doesn't let go easy." When I got home, the house felt different. The air inside was heavier, like the smell of rain before a storm. I tried to tell myself the old man was just trying to scare me, but the story wouldn't leave my head. That night the silence came back. 2:47 a.m. exactly. I sat up, holding my breath, listening. The creaking was there again, but softer this time. Not wood bending, something brushing against it. A sound like fingertips dragging along the outside wall. I turned on my lamp, trying to push away the shadows, and that's when I noticed the window. The glass was fogged over, from the outside. And in the center of it, drawn in a single motion, was that same crooked symbol. I froze. My chest felt tight, every instinct screaming to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then as I stared at the mark, a faint light flickered through the fog. Not from my room, from the trees. The glow. The same one I'd seen months ago. It pulsed faintly, almost like it was breathing. And I could swear I heard something underneath it, just barely audible, a low, steady hum, like a voice humming the same few notes over and over again. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and tried not to look, but I couldn't help it. The light grew stronger, closer, as if whatever it was had started moving toward the house. And then, just as suddenly as it came, it went out. The silence that followed felt alive. When I looked back at the window, the fog was gone. The glass was clear. And where the symbol had been, there was now something else. A faint handprint pressed flat against the glass. But it wasn't mine. For a long time I just stood there staring at that handprint. It looked almost normal. 5 fingers, faint lines where the palm pressed against the glass, but something about it felt off. The fingers seemed too long, the spacing too wide, like whoever left it had tried to imitate a human hand but hadn't quite gotten it right. I finally gathered enough courage to touch it. The glass was cold, colder than the rest of the window, like frost even though the air inside was warm. My fingertips left no smudge, and when I wiped at it with my sleeve, the print didn't fade. It was there to stay, a perfect pale outline against the dark glass. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. When morning came, the print was still there. My dad noticed it when he went to check the locks, but he didn't say a word. He just looked at it, then at me, and walked away. That silence between us said more than words could. He believed me now, but neither of us wanted to admit it. Later that day, I tried to focus on normal things. Homework, helping my mom in the kitchen, pretending everything was fine. But my mind kept drifting back to the woods. To that old clearing where I'd found the nail, to the stories the old man told me. Something inside me whispered that there was more to uncover, that the answers were waiting if I just looked hard enough. So that evening I went up to the attic. Our house was old, and most of the boxes up there hadn't been touched in years. Dust hung in the air like thin fog, and the floorboards groaned under every step. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe something left by the previous owners, a clue about the boy Mr. Harlan mentioned. It took hours of digging through boxes before I found anything unusual. An old folder at the bottom of a chest, its paper yellowed and brittle. Inside were property records, old newspaper clippings, and a few photographs. Most of it was boring, dates, land surveys, signatures, but one article caught my eye. The headline read, "Local boy still missing after 3 weeks, search continues near Ashford Woods." There was a photo of the boy, maybe 10 or 11, smiling at the camera. Behind him was something blurry but unmistakable, a wooden structure built into a large oak. My stomach dropped. The same tree. The same shape of the platform. The article was from almost 30 years ago. According to the story, the boy had last been seen playing near the woods behind his family's home. His father reported hearing odd knocking sounds that night, but when he went to check, the treehouse was empty. Search teams found no trace except for several wooden boards with strange carvings burned into them. I set the article down and rubbed my eyes. There were more papers underneath, letters, receipts, even a hand-drawn map of the property. In one corner, written faintly in pencil, was something that looked like a note. Keep away from the roots. I didn't know what that meant, but I couldn't stop staring at it. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, like it had been written in a hurry. That night I dreamed about the tree. I was standing beneath it again, but the branches were bare and the air smelled like metal. I could hear whispering, though I couldn't make out the words. Then the ground beneath the tree began to move, pulsing like something alive was buried there. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. When I got up, the handprint on the window was gone. But something else was there instead, faint streaks of dirt on the floor near the door, like footprints leading away from my room. I followed them down the hall to the back door. The lock was still bolted, the chain in place. But near the threshold, lying just inside the doorway, was a small piece of paper folded twice over. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, written in the same shaky handwriting I'd seen on the map, were just 3 words. It's not gone. I dropped the paper like it burned. My first thought was that someone had broken in. My second thought was that it wasn't possible. Nothing in the house had been touched, and the alarm hadn't gone off. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I couldn't focus on anything, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. Every sound made me jump. My parents noticed, but they didn't ask. I think they were just as afraid of the answers as I was. That night, I sat on my bed staring at the woods again. The trees looked calm under the moonlight, quiet and harmless. For the first time in months, I wanted to go out there, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I needed to know what was buried under that oak. I waited until the house was still, until both my parents' bedroom lights went dark. Then I took a flashlight and quietly slipped out the back door. The woods greeted me with that same uneasy stillness. Every step I took felt heavier, the air thicker. The path to the clearing seemed longer than before, twisted somehow, but I knew exactly where I was going. When I reached the spot, I found the ground just as I'd left it, ash scattered in a circle, the dirt darker in the middle. I crouched down, sweeping my hand through the soil. It felt soft, loose, like someone had dug there recently. Then I saw something glint again under the light. Another nail, blackened and old. I brushed it aside and kept digging, my fingers cutting through the damp earth. And that's when I felt it, wood. Smooth, flat, too perfect to be natural. I froze, listening. The forest around me was silent. No wind. No birds. Just my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I scraped more dirt away until the outline became clearer, not a branch but a piece of board half buried. A plank. Old, burned, and carved with the same crooked symbol. My flashlight flickered once, then twice before dying completely. I was left in total darkness. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Then I heard it, not a voice this time, but the faintest sound of wood creaking, coming from somewhere above me. The sound a treehouse makes when someone steps inside that I didn't dare move at first. That creaking sound above me froze every muscle in my body. The treehouse was gone, burned, erased, but the sound was real. Slow, deliberate steps, as if someone was pacing overhead on invisible boards. I tilted my head upward, squinting into the black canopy. My flashlight was dead, but the moonlight seeped weakly through the branches. There was nothing there. Just the silhouette of the tree, skeletal limbs stretching out like arms. Still, the creaking went on, wood bending under weight that shouldn't exist. I told myself it was the wind. It had to be. But then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Total silence. Even the forest seemed to be holding its breath. Something in me wanted to run. But another part, the part that had been restless since the first night I saw that light, told me to stay, to look, to understand. So I stayed. I turned the flashlight over in my hands, tapping the side, shaking it until it flickered back to life. The beam was weaker now, sputtering, but enough to see where I'd been digging. The board I'd uncovered was only the edge of something larger. I brushed more dirt aside, revealing what looked like part of a floor. The wood was warped and cracked, but underneath it I could see faint lines, carvings, shapes that didn't make sense. I traced them with my fingertips. Circles intersecting with triangles, symbols like letters but not from any alphabet I knew. The texture of the wood felt uneven, almost pulsing beneath my skin. And then I heard breathing. Not my own. It came from just behind me, low and shallow, like someone trying not to be heard. I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my hand. Its beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just the same path I'd walked in on, the same trees, unmoving. The breathing stopped. I stood still, listening, waiting for any sound that might tell me I wasn't alone. But all I heard was my own pulse roaring in my ears. When I finally turned back toward the hole, the ground had changed. The board I'd uncovered was now slightly tilted upward, as if something underneath had pushed it. I stumbled back, tripping over roots. The flashlight slipped from my grip, hitting the dirt with a dull thud, and the beam swung upward, right into the branches above. That's when I saw it. A figure. Small. Sitting among the branches. It looked like a child. Knees drawn up, head tilted slightly to one side. The light hit its face for just a second. Pale skin, hollow eyes, no expression at all. Then the beam flickered and died again. The branches rustled. Something moved. I didn't look back. I ran. Branches tore at my sleeves as I sprinted through the trees, the dark pressing in around me. I didn't know where the path was anymore. Every turn looked the same. I just kept running until I saw the faint outline of my house through the clearing. When I burst through the back door, my parents were waiting, wide-eyed, pale. My mom grabbed my arm. "Where were you?" she whispered, shaking. "We heard." She stopped herself. "Heard what?" I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. I told them I couldn't sleep and went out for air. My dad wanted to check the woods, but I begged him not to. Eventually he agreed, though I saw the way he looked at me, the way you look at someone who's seen something they shouldn't have. That night I stayed awake, sitting by my window. I couldn't see the tree anymore. The fog had rolled in thick, swallowing everything. But I could hear it, faintly, that same slow creaking sound drifting through the mist. The next morning when I went downstairs, my dad was already outside. The door was open. He was standing at the edge of the yard, staring into the fog. "Something's out there," he said quietly when I joined him. I saw movement near the fence. The footprints stopped right where the grass met the porch steps. They were small, faint, and spaced too evenly, as if whoever made them had been walking slowly, carefully. There were no prints leading away, just the ones coming toward the house. My dad crouched down to get a closer look, brushing his fingers across the damp grass. The prints were fresh. You could see the pressed blade still bent in the same shape of a bare foot. Neither of us said anything for a while. The fog around us was starting to lift, and the faint sunlight gave the scene an eerie calm, like the world was pretending nothing had happened. My dad stood up and looked toward the woods. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before, a quiet, growing fear he didn't want to admit to. "We'll call someone," he finally said. "Maybe it's just a kid from town messing around." But even as he said it, I could tell he didn't believe that. Inside, Mom tried to act like everything was normal. She made breakfast, turned on the radio, talked about the week like it was any other morning. But every few minutes, her eyes would dart to the window, checking the yard. The whole house felt tense, like the walls themselves were listening. Later that afternoon, I sat in my room and stared at the piece of paper I'd found the night before, the one that said "It's not gone." I'd stuffed it into my desk drawer, but now I couldn't stop thinking about it. The handwriting looked old, uneven, maybe even shaky from cold or fear. But what really bothered me was that it didn't look like a child's writing. It looked like an adult's. The air in my room felt heavy again, the same strange weight that always came when I thought about the treehouse. I turned on my lamp, but the light flickered once and went dim. Maybe it was the wiring, maybe not. Either way, it was enough to make my pulse quicken. To distract myself, I opened the folder from the attic again. There was one page I hadn't read before, a police report clipped to the back of the newspaper article. It was short, barely a paragraph, but what it said made my hands go cold. Search teams discovered remnants of a structure believed to be a children's playhouse. Charred boards recovered from the site bore symbols of unknown origin. No signs of the missing child were found. The case remains open. The date at the bottom was nearly 30 years ago, but that didn't matter. I could still picture the boards exactly as I'd seen them that night, buried under the dirt. The same carvings. The same symbols. The same place. I wanted to show my parents, but I already knew what they'd say. My mom would tell me to stop looking at old ghost stories, and my dad would try to explain it away. Coincidence, imagination, tricks of the light. But even they couldn't ignore the footprints. That night, sleep came in fragments. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes. The pale face in the tree, the burned wood, the flickering light inside the treehouse that wasn't there anymore. Sometimes I heard faint tapping sounds against the window, too soft to be anything real. I told myself it was branches or wind, but deep down I wasn't sure. By morning my nerves were shot. I decided to go back to the clearing in daylight. Maybe I'd find something I missed, something normal that could explain all of it. The air was crisp when I stepped outside, the smell of damp earth filling the yard. My dad was in the shed fixing a fence post, and I told him I was going for a walk. He just nodded but didn't look up. It was like we'd silently agreed not to talk about it anymore. The path through the woods looked different in daylight. Less threatening, more ordinary. Birds chirped, sunlight filtered through the leaves, and for a moment, I felt almost foolish for being afraid. But the closer I got to the clearing, the quieter everything became again. The air thickened. Even the sound of my footsteps seemed to fade. When I reached the spot, the circle of ash was still there. The ground looked disturbed, as if something had been shifted during the night. I crouched down, brushing the dirt aside, and saw that the board I'd found before was gone. Only the imprint of its shape remained. That's when I noticed something else, small pieces of string hanging from a branch above, swaying gently in the wind. There were 4 of them, unevenly spaced, each tied in a small loop. They looked almost like someone had tried to rebuild something and stopped halfway through. The smell hit me next. Not strong, but faintly metallic, like rusted nails or old smoke. I took a step back, and that's when I saw it. Fresh footprints, smaller than mine, circling the clearing. The same ones that had led to our house. I followed them as far as I could until they vanished into the underbrush. Every direction they went seemed to lead back toward the same spot, as if whoever made them had been walking in circles. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye, a faint shimmer in the dirt where the sunlight hit it just right. I knelt down and picked it up. It was a small metal tag, tarnished and bent, with a few letters still visible, EW. The rest was too corroded to read. I slipped it into my pocket and walked home, my mind spinning. Who was EW? Could it have been the boy from the article? Or someone else entirely? That evening after dinner, I went back to the attic. I searched through every box, every folder, hoping to find another clue. Finally, at the bottom of a stack of yellowed photographs, I found something. It was a picture of the same boy again, standing beside an older man. The man's arm was around the boy's shoulder, and they were both smiling at the camera. Behind them was the same tree, the one from the clearing. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, was written, Andrew and William, 1993. My hands shook slightly as I held the tag again. The initials matched. Andrew was the boy from the article. But William, was that his father? The same Mr. Harlan who'd told me about the fire? I needed to know more. That night, I couldn't resist walking back to the fence line. The fog had returned, rolling low over the ground. The woods looked endless, swallowing sound and light. I stood there for a long time, staring at the faint outline of the trees, trying to find the courage to step closer. Then, from somewhere deep within the fog, I heard it again. Creak. The slow groaning sound of wood shifting under unseen weight. I froze, every nerve on edge. It came again, longer this time, like the careful step of someone testing each board. I tried to tell myself it was just the trees moving in the wind. But there was no wind. The air was completely still. Then came another sound, softer but unmistakable, a child's laugh. Short, distant, almost playful, echoing through the fog before fading into silence. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct told me to run back inside, to lock the doors and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But something deeper inside me, curiosity maybe or some strange pull, kept me rooted where I stood. That's when I noticed the light. A faint, warm glow flickering between the trees. Just like the first night I saw it. The same place. The same tree. The same impossible light. I took one slow step toward it, then another, my heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. Each step seemed to make the world quieter, as if everything else was holding its breath, waiting. When I reached the edge of the clearing, the light vanished, gone in an instant like it had never been there at all. But the smell of smoke lingered, faint but real, and the ash circle looked freshly disturbed, as if something had moved beneath it. I stood there in the dark, too afraid to move closer, too curious to leave. The fog swirled gently around my feet, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw the outline of a small figure standing near the base of the tree. Then it blinked out of sight. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back at the house, chest heaving, my hands shaking so hard I could barely close the door behind me. When I finally dared to look outside again, the fog was still there, but the faint shape of the tree was gone, hidden completely. Only one thing remained clear against the window pane. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that small handprint on the window. The faint letters, AW, seemed to glow faintly in the reflection whenever the moonlight shifted. I sat there until dawn, half expecting to hear the creak of the treehouse again or that distant, playful laugh carried through the fog. But the night stayed quiet, too quiet, like the world itself was holding back something I wasn't supposed to know yet. When morning came, I told myself it had to stop. No more night walks, no more digging, no more chasing ghosts. I needed to know the truth, yes, but maybe that truth was simpler than I thought. Maybe I was just feeding my own imagination. That's what I told myself over and over, but it didn't feel true. The fear I felt wasn't something imagined. It was heavy, familiar, like it belonged to the house itself. My dad had already gone into town when I came downstairs. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into her coffee like she hadn't slept either. The silence between us said everything. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Your father doesn't want you going near those woods anymore," she said softly. "He's worried." "Did he see something?" I asked. She hesitated. "He didn't say. But he came inside late last night around 2. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Just sat down in the living room and didn't move for a while." "What was he doing outside?" "He said he thought he heard a child crying," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "He went out to look but didn't find anyone." A chill crawled up my arms. After breakfast, I went into town. There was a small public library near the square, one of those old brick buildings with tall windows and a bell that chimed every hour. I didn't really know what I was looking for, but I figured I'd start with the missing boy, Andrew. Maybe there were more records, something the newspaper hadn't printed. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes and a sharp memory, helped me find the local archives. Most of the papers were microfilmed, so I scrolled through the faded pages until I found what I needed. The search stretched on for hours. Finally, I found another article dated a few months after the disappearance. It said the search for Andrew Whitman had been officially suspended. The father, William, had moved away shortly after, refusing interviews. Some neighbors claimed he wasn't the same afterward, often wandering the woods late at night calling his son's name. Others said they saw strange lights in the trees, and heard wood creaking even after the treehouse had been burned down. One sentence stood out to me more than the rest. Mr. Whitman claimed that the tree would not let his son go. That line stuck in my head all the way home. The tree would not let his son go. What did that mean? Was it guilt, grief, or something else entirely? That evening when my dad returned, I showed him the photo I'd found in the attic. He took it slowly, staring at it for a long time before speaking. "This man," he said, pointing at William, "he used to own this property before we did. I met him once years ago when we were thinking about buying the land." "What was he like?" He frowned, remembering. "Quiet. Strange maybe. Said he'd never sell the woods but changed his mind later. He mentioned the boy once. Said the woods took him. I thought he was talking about an accident. But there was something in his eyes when he said it. Like he was afraid of something still out there." "Did you tell anyone?" I asked. "I tried," he said. But nobody believed him. They said the man lost his mind after his kid disappeared. I wanted to ask more, but he put the photo down and walked away, muttering something about not bringing old stories back up. That night I couldn't resist. I sat in my room looking at the woods through my window. The fog hadn't come yet, but the moonlight made everything look pale and ghost-like. I turned the photo over in my hands again, Andrew and William, smiling, the treehouse in the background. And then I noticed something I hadn't before. There was a faint shadow in the background of the picture, just behind the tree. Not a trick of light. Something darker, shaped like a figure standing just beyond the frame. My stomach turned. I leaned closer, tracing the edges of the shape. It almost looked like someone standing there, facing the treehouse, watching them. I shoved the photo into my drawer and turned off the light, trying not to think about it. But sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard before. It wasn't the creaking this time. It was whispering. Soft, indistinct words like a child mumbling in their sleep. It came from outside the window. I froze, every nerve in my body alert. Slowly I turned my head toward the sound. The fog was back, thicker than before, and through it I could see something faint, movement slow and deliberate, just at the edge of the woods. The whispering stopped. Then clear as day came a voice. A boy's voice. "Come back."